Welcome to the Rollerskate to Liberate Wheel of Risk. This wheel was created in collaboration with educators, human trafficking experts, survivors, and those with lived experience. It identifies the many risk factors that can lead individuals into, or keep them in, a trafficking situation. Someone who doesn't fall into these categories can still be trafficked, but the overwhelming majority of trafficked individuals identify with at least one of these risk factors. We're going to start with what we believe to be the biggest risk factor: lack of healthy relationships. If a person grows up without emotional support, affection, and care from their loved ones, their idea of what a healthy relationship looks like will be warped. If the person is physically or emotionally abused at home, they might think that's normal. If they were sexually assaulted when they were young, they might think that's what a loving relationship looks like. A person with these beliefs is much more likely to become a victim of human trafficking and exploitation because a trafficker is ready to provide false love and support to someone who doesn't have an understanding of real love and healthy relationships in the first place. The second risk factor in the wheel of risk is age. Children are easy targets for human traffickers. If a young kid is bouncing around the foster care system, or has run away, or has been kicked out of their home, they're lacking in basic care and affection. To these kids, the initial attention and interest paid to them by human traffickers can be irresistible. But age is a risk factor beyond early childhood. Teenage and early 20s caregivers can be just at risk as the children they care for. A young mother may become exploited while trying to feed her kids, or an older sibling who lacks parental help may be forced into the sex trade to care for a younger sibling. The elderly, too, are at risk. Rendered vulnerable by health conditions or lack of mobility, older individuals can be taken advantage of by human traffickers. And to make matters worse, the elderly, just like children, tend not to be believed when they speak out about their abuse. The next risk factor we're covering is sexual orientation and gender identity. LGBTQ+ youth are 7.4 times more likely to experience sexual violence than their heterosexual peers, and approximately 5 times more likely to meet their basic needs by engaging in commercial sex. Sex which, for this group in particular, is likely to push them far out of their comfort zone, sometimes resulting in assault or rape. Because of abuse or lack of acceptance at home, or because of discrimination from their peer group at large, LGBTQ+ youth may run away or be kicked out, making them even more vulnerable. The fourth risk factor is race. Today, victims of trafficking are disproportionately women of color, specifically Indigenous and Black women. These women are desired by buyers who are disproportionately comprised of white men, and oftentimes they may experience buyers with a fetish of a violent or racist nature. Discriminatory policing practices render this demographic of women more vulnerable still, making it more difficult to access proper exit services and support for those wanting to leave their trafficking situations. The fifth risk factor is poverty. Someone who is chronically homeless or living paycheck to paycheck is constantly in survival mode. They may be more likely to resort to desperate measures that they normally wouldn't have considered, or endure circumstances they don't like or deserve, such as engaging in survival sex. Homeless shelters are a common spot for traffickers to hang out and a common place for assaults and abuse to occur. Someone who has lived in homeless shelters most of their life may be more willing to enter into a dangerous situation for survival. The sixth risk factor is addiction, a disease caused in someone's brain that can cause them to go to desperate measures to continue their habit. So it's not surprising traffickers use drug as a means to obtain and control their victims. Even necessary prescription drugs, such as insulin for diabetics, can be used as leverage by traffickers. The next risk factor is something we all know too well: our hypersexualized culture. Like Snoop Dogg says, "Pimpin' ain't easy." Grand Theft Auto gives us points when we kill prostitutes. Ads, music, social media all focus heavily on sex, past the point of sex positivity and being comfortable in your own skin. There are unattainable ideals thrown at us for how to look and act, and the role sex should play in our lives. Porn certainly doesn't help, and usually gives kids the wrong idea about what healthy sex and relationships look like. Plus, our culture has made it taboo to talk about. Parents and kids feel uncomfortable talking about sex, and in cases of abuse, kids are told to keep it a secret. The 8th risk factor is lack of education. Knowledge is power. When an individual lacks proper education, whether through underfunded schools, limited opportunities for higher education, or a generally negative attitude towards education, traffickers can convince the person that they don't need education at all, that they can miss school because they can make more money without it. Even when people do value education, proper sex education isn't required in all public schools. Study after study has shown with a lack of proper healthy relationships, consent, and sex education, sexual abuse, teenage pregnancy, and human trafficking all increase. The 9th risk factor is disabilities. Someone who has a severe and persistent mental illness can often be seen as unreliable, unbelievable, or not a true victim. They're less likely to be believed when reporting signs of abuse and may not have the resources and support to make the report at all. When a traumatic event happens, it is normal for there to be depression, anxiety, PTSD, disassociation, and complex trauma. The presence of these conditions further increases the likelihood of trafficking and exploitation. Our final risk factor is immigration status. A recent immigrant finds themselves in a foreign place. Maybe they don't speak English or have language barriers. Perhaps they find themselves without a support system. Whether they are here undocumented or whether they have papers, obtaining a job can be difficult, leaving them vulnerable to traffickers who want to exploit them. They may promise them a better life, help with immigration status, and a nice place to stay. In reality, these traffickers use their status against them to control and exploit them, often for labor services.